What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. So we got a little more information on the DLC for Scarlet and Violet, we got an official release date for the first part at least, and we got to see some cool new trainers that we'll run into along the way, and looks at the new Paradox Pokemon that we expected to see anyway. But what was truly shocking, aside from the confirmation that we're basically going to be leaving the Paldea region for the whole time, guess they're not going to bother fixing any of its massive problems, is also the fact that we got to see brand new Pokemon. And I don't just mean those weird starter-like ones that we already knew about. No, at first, I thought there was a regional Applin here, but apparently it's actually a new evolution called Dipplin. I guess Applin is now firmly in the Tyrogue club of 3 separate evolutions. What seems to be different enough about this one is the fact that there are now 2 Applin within the same apple. But that was not all, because we also saw this thing that I thought was a regional Duraludon, but no, it's also apparently a new evolution, Archaludon. I don't really love that name, and the fact that it's a bridge is a little bit odd. I'm not sure slimming it down is the natural course of evolution, seeing as how it was a skyscraper before, but hey, just the fact that there is a new evolution is an interesting notion, especially considering both of these Pokemon were from last generation. It only took until the next games for the people in charge to realize that these Pokemon weren't quite complete, or that the ideas could be fleshed out a little bit more. And since we've already gotten a number of other evolutions recently, it's pretty clear that this has become a real focus of Pokemon once again, even over regional variants, at least for the time being. So, which other Pokemon should get a new evolution in the Gen 9 DLC? Well, to keep things on theme, I think we'll look at Gen 8 first. There are plenty of past Pokemon that need help, but the newer ones shouldn't be overlooked just because they are new. It can be hard to know what the people behind these decisions are thinking, because I wouldn't have pegged Applin or Duraludon for this kind of aid, but that's fine. So I would say that Pincurchin is definitely a new Pokemon in need of some love. This is a rare, one-off Pokemon found super late in the game. Now, I have nothing against one-offs. I think the likes of Cramorant are perfectly fine on their own, and even Phalanx is probably fine as a single stage. But Pincurchin is only obtainable hours after those, and past several other electric types that you'd already rather use first. But how would it change exactly? Well, considering its origins as a sea urchin, I could see a new evolution actually gaining that water type, cause we haven't actually seen a water electric type since Rotom's washing machine side form, so it's been quite a while. Or if they wanted to, maybe they could turn it into an anemone or something, and then I could see it becoming an electric and poison type. Maybe even an aquatic porcupine or something ridiculous and funny like that. That typing might not be as novel since it already comes from the same region as Toxel, who can also be found in Paldea, but it could fill a different role on the team if you wanted to shake up its stats. And it doesn't even really matter that Pincurchin is already in Scarlet and Violet because Applin was too, and it got its new evolution in the Teal Mask anyway. So we could see this Pincurchin get a similar gift of evolution of some kind, and actually help people remember that it existed in the first place. Now, if it were up to me, we would also get a new evolution for Corvisquire that would remain a pure flying type, since we still don't have a fully evolved flying type that's not a legendary, but I doubt that'll happen. So instead, let's turn our sights to Sandaconda. First of all, the ground type has been horrendously mistreated since the 3DS by having next to no unique additions across the last 4 generations. So I guess the Silicobra line was at least a little something to get, however, I don't think it quite lived up to the full potential. Apart from Orbeetle's Gigantamax form, I think Sandaconda is probably the Pokemon that most should have had this design from the start, since the Sand Tornado gimmick is pretty amazing. However, that may be too different from the base design choices if in fact they wanted to go for a blunderbuss weapon sort of Sand Blaster, but hey, we can work with that too. If we're wanting artillery, we could see Sandaconda evolve to grow multiple heads that are able to rapidly shoot sand from their nostrils in all different directions. The evolution could dump a lot more stats into its HP and special attack, and even maybe take some of that from speed if you wanted. And you could probably add in the dragon typing, or maybe even dark. Either one could be believable, but would also be terrifying for an aggressive desert hydra. And I think this would fit surprisingly well, and maybe it could redeem this evolutionary family a bit, since honestly I'm not a huge fan of Silicobra's initial sad-looking design, but this new King of the Dunes as an evolution could change all of that. However, I don't think these evolutions will solely be focused on Galar Pokémon. Paldea already used several origins, including Unova, and the recent spotlights in Hisui and Galar as well may mean that Gen 5 is having a bit of a resurgence. I mean, obviously Serperior could use a new form change since it's now the only starter without a dual typing. However, we're not really talking about that. So initially my mind goes to Pokemon like Liepard, who are kind of okay near the beginning but lose steam as the game goes on. I mean, if Bisharp needed to be bolstered, then the poor cat with nearly 50 less base stat points could probably use a pick-me-up as well. So the common thing that most people would think of is a Snow Leopard, Ice-type sort of thing, which would be cool, but is also probably more of a regional variant. I'm not saying that it couldn't be Ice, you could evolve it into that if you want, maybe even with Saberteeth, but I'd also think another Big Cat evolution would fit just fine. Whether that be for a Panther to lean further into the dark theme, or perhaps a different spotted cat like a Cheetah. Maybe that would be better as its own thing, but you could really lean into Liepard's speed here and drive it through the roof as a cheetah so that we could carve out a niche for this left-behind line of feline Pokémon. And then of course there are other Pokémon from Unova that I could see getting evolutions, like Ferrothorn probably has some decent potential for growth, but the spiky grass type has been used a ton already and doesn't really need as much help as say poor overlooked Pokémon like Durant or Heatmor. So instead, we'll need to look at something like the Elemental Monkeys. Well, except not really them, because I don't want to have to do 3 of them. I want to say maybe that Crustle deserves some more love too, but it's not a bad Pokemon, and at the very least it's randomly a playable character in Pokemon Unite, so that's something, I guess. Rather, I think the attention should go to the Pokemon just before Crustle with Maractus. I know it's a bit of a meme at this point to say that Maractus is forgotten or just a bad Pokemon, but there's a reason that people have always talked about it in the same breath as Dunsparce. And now, since Dunsparce did get an evolution, maybe we could see the same thing happen to the lone Gen 5 Cactus. But speaking of its inspiration, there are no shortage of other cacti variations that you could use in a new Pokemon to make it stand out from the others that we've already seen. So maybe a Maractus family with a new type added on could finally climb out of the shadows to join the realm of decent, respectable Pokemon. But if we're talking about lackluster grass types in need of help, we definitely ought to look back at Sunflora. This thing wasn't even great in its debut generation, and it only got worse over time with more competition in the field. None of its stats are all that outstanding, so I'm not sure that a regional form merely shifting those around would be enough help. However, the boost that an evolution could give could just be the thing to help these sunflowers out. And even with having a whole gym challenge devoted to it in Paldea, it was just embarrassingly poorly put together, and frankly insulting to have those horrendous frame rates so close to my face. So Sunflora needs redemption. One of the most common requests in this regard is to turn it into a grass and fire type, mostly because of the whole sun aspect of these flowers, so that does make sense, but it would also maybe not be quite as satisfying to find in the DLC of the same games that introduced that combination for the first time. So instead, I could pretty easily see a Sunflora evolution gaining the fairy typing. Not that it needs a new typing necessarily if an evolution got better stats, abilities, and attacks, but it certainly helps to set them apart from pure grass. Of course, the fairy might not fit depending on the design choices that they decide to go with, but even a grass and ground or a grass and psychic or something could be the thing to tip a Sunflora evolution over the edge to be a left-behind Pokemon given a new chance in the modern day, just like Girafarig or Primeape. Will the new DLC allow this to happen? I suppose we'll see, but assuming we're not going to see any Gen 9 Pokemon updated, because that would just be pretty ridiculous, we can at least check in on the second most recent generation with Alola. Personally, I think Komala could probably use a bit of help, but I'm also not sure where you would take a Koala, so what if instead we go with Minior? I really appreciate Minior as a unique concept, and it pulls this off quite well, but that's not really the issue here. It may not be obvious when there are hundreds of other Pokemon to keep track of, but as it turns out, Minior hasn't been available in a game since the Alola region. It has totally set out of Gens 8 and 9 so far, so isn't it about time that we get to see these multicolored space rocks again? And what better excuse to bring them back into the fold than to have a new evolution for Minior? There could be any number of space phenomena on which to base a more advanced form of this Pokemon, far more than just being a bigger rainbow asteroid. It could be a nebula of some kind, or even a planet of its very own. Or perhaps the best of all, Minior could evolve into a comet with a tail of all of the colors trailing behind it. Would it still have the shields down ability? Who knows, but I would love to find out by seeing it streak through the skies over the Indigo Disk. But speaking of the second half of the DLC, I've not really seen a lot of people talking about the Alolan Pokémon that were shown on screen in the Indigo Disk. Does that mean that you can catch one out in the wild? Probably, so really that means that any regional variants could be fair game here, but just because they already got attention doesn't mean it was a good enough fix. Now, I actually think most of the Alola and Hisui forms did a pretty good job, all in all, but some of the Galarian ones could still use some work, namely Stunfisk. Stunfisk was already easily one of the most looked down on Pokémon, and to fix it, they made it the only regional variant with no other evolutions until Tauros, but at least the bull got multiple forms out of it. Stunfisk was just turned into a bear trap and they called it a day. Now, it is true that Ground and Steel is not a bad typing at all, but why did they make its special defense worse? It's gonna need that to handle half of its weaknesses, but an evolution to buff all of those stats would fix a lot of this. I'm not really sure what you would build off of a bear trap, but I'm sure they could come up with something, because not even the steel-using antagonist of the region cared to rep this Pokémon on his team. That's how little Stunfisk was helped out by this. So, since we're already breaking trends with new evolutions all throughout Gen 9 anyway, why not randomly give one to one of the past regional variants? Now, the hidden treasure of Area Zero may not actually show us much more than Dipplin and Archaludon, but it's too fun not to speculate. So, what potential new evolutions would you most like to see in the DLC? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.